Yo!
Hello and welcome.
Boys, but not the CineBoys podcast. Part of the Cork Bats Podcast Network. I'm Kenny from Cork Bats, head boy at the CineBoys, and Three Big Things is a podcast where I sit down with a guest to discuss this weekend's biggest movie release. So why is it called Three Big Things? Simple. We're going to give you three big things, sometimes more, that you should consider if you're on the fence about seeing the movie. This week, we're discussing Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. And I'm going to be joined by my fellow CineBoi, Mr. Tom Bragg. Tom, how are you?
What's up? I'm good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Just to gauge the room, how do you feel about Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1?
Loved it. Had a great time.
Cool. Me too. Cool. So yeah, if you're not familiar, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is the 7th film in the Mission Impossible franchise, which has been going on now for almost 30 years. That's wild. That's wild.
I remember the first one coming out.
Yeah, me too. It was like a big deal, but yeah. I was old enough to know what things were, and I remember this. Yes. But yeah, I mean, essentially, this one is directed by Christopher McQuarrie. It stars Tom Cruise, of course, Haley Atwell, Rebecca Ferguson, Vanessa Kirby, Simon Pegg, also Ving Rhames makes a return appearance. And yeah, essentially the plot of this one: Ethan Hunt and the IMF team must track down a terrifying new weapon that threatens all of humanity if it falls into the wrong hands. With control of the future and the fate of the world at stake, a deadly race around the globe begins. Confronted by a mysterious, all-powerful enemy, Ethan is forced to consider that nothing can matter more than the mission, not even the lives of those he cares about the most. So just a quick heads up. We always say we try to avoid spoilers, but sometimes we just feel like we need to have that conversation. So we'll say spoiler adjacent. We don't know if we're going to talk spoilers today. We will give you a firm heads up before we do so you are aware of that. And you will know if you haven't seen the movie yet to go ahead and stop listening for a bit. That being said, let's get into it. I'm ready to talk Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. So here's how it works. Tom, you know it. You've been here a few times as the guest. You get to bring two big things to discuss about this movie. So let's go ahead. Let's hear it. What is your first big thing that people should know about Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1?
I think my first big thing is we actually get a little background information on Ethan Hunt. Like, I don't feel like we'd ever really gotten that before. And in this one, it's very brief. It's not a lot, but it's like probably the most we've ever gotten before. And I was interested by that.
Yes.
What do you think?
Yes. Yeah, I was actually hoping for a little bit more on that.
And I'm wondering if we will, because it's possibly Part 1. So I'm hoping we'll get more.
But it was presented in such a way as if like, and you're right, maybe we'll get more in Part 2. But it was presented in such a way that it was extremely vague to the point where I felt like they just assumed we would know more as the audience. Like, as if like we have all done a deep dive into Mission Impossible and Ethan Hunt lore on our own time.
No,
and we just know what happened. Where basically we got a very vague understanding that something happened. Somehow it affected him. And because of that, it was somehow in trouble with the law, and he joined the IMF.
Which then also makes me think about how the IMF seems like it's built mostly of criminals of some sort. And like they've done that in the past. Like they'll bring in like these new characters who have like a criminal or shady history. But for the last 30 some years, like we've always just kind of assumed it was like, in my case anyway, I've always assumed that they were just like former military, whatever, and they're just standard spies. But no, it seems like it's kind of almost a criminal organization in some respects.
Borderline.
Cool.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure. I don't think that's ever something that's been presented to us as the audience for the Mission Impossible franchise. So that is definitely a new little wrinkle, if you will, as far as how that gets formed. I also just think, and I've always thought this is just kind of a side note, IMF is the Impossible Mission Force is such a stupid name.
Oh yeah.
And like when they said it out loud in this one, people in the audience laughed because it's like, that's so dumb.
But they've like said that before, like they say it in Mission Impossible 3, and it's just like, okay, so it's always been kind of silly, and like I feel like they know that, but you know, you're just along for the ride. Like they've kind of figured out the way to make these movies and how they work, and I'm gonna like them.
Yeah,
I don't know.
So going back to your big thing though, yes, we get this a little bit of background, and that background plays into the main villain because apparently the main villain and Ethan Hunt have a past. Now it's never explained what that past is. Again, they might hopefully will explain it in part 2. But it seemed to me, I think the issue I had with it was that it seemed so throwaway. Like it was like I said, we're just supposed to assume that we know what's going on, but we really don't. So hopefully that gets remedied.
I'm wondering if they will, because there's also that. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're
there's
good.
also Shea Wiggum's character. It's hinted at has a past with Ethan Hunt as well, but they never show any flashbacks of that or explain it. And so that's why I'm thinking, okay, part 2 is going to flesh out more of this backstory stuff, I think.
Yeah, I also just want to say real quick how much I love Shea Wiggum. Like as
he's
an
one
actor,
of my favorites.
He's one of those guys that shows up in things. He's never the star, but he's always fantastic.
He's always great.
Part of me was hoping during this movie that at some point that he would join Ethan's team. Like it seemed like there was a conversation between him and his partner on the train where they're talking about like, is Ethan Hunt a good or a bad guy essentially?
Yeah.
And it seems like, it'd be really cool if Shea Wiggum becomes a regular in these movies because he's so good.
Yeah, and I wonder if maybe part 2 that will kind of develop a little bit, because he kind of ended up like teaming up with him a little bit. That scene on the train when he's trying to help get people off.
Right. Yeah. Very briefly, but yeah, absolutely. So shout out to Shea Wiggum, friend of the podcast. Yeah. Not really. He has no idea who we are.
No, but I'd love it if he did.
Yeah, that'd be great. But yeah, so that's awesome first big thing. Thanks, Tom. So now let's move on to big thing number 2, which I will present now. My second big thing, or my big thing on Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is, man, that's a mouthful. It feels, and you know, this will be in the review that's going to come out for Corked Bats, but the big thing that I kind of noticed is that if I were to, you know, explain this movie to somebody, like just explain the plot of the movie to like somebody who hasn't seen it, I feel like the response would be like, yeah, that sounds like a Mission Impossible movie. That sounds pretty on par to what we've gotten in the past. But for whatever reason, I can't put my finger on it, but this one does feel different than other Mission Impossible movies.
It does.
And I think that could have something to do with some of the routes they decided to take story-wise. And I won't go into spoilers. There's one thing that happens in this movie that, honestly, if you're just asking me personally, I was kind of like really upset about that they decided to, you know, essentially kill off a certain character. I won't say who.
Yeah.
And it kind of pissed me off because it's like one of my favorite characters in the whole franchise.
Too. As soon as that character stepped on the bridge, though, I was like, all right, I know this is it.
Yes.
We're going to say goodbye.
Yep. And that was kind of a huge bummer, but it was also somewhat unexpected. I wasn't expecting that to take a turn. It feels like it felt like they, at least for the past 4 movies, that they were, you know, building on the use of that character.
Yeah.
But they just kind of took a left turn on it. So yeah, other than that though, honestly, the story is pretty straightforward. It's nothing too crazy. Obviously, this feels like the biggest like threat.
Yes.
But I mean, you got to escalate it every movie. So
yeah, you do. And I was talking, so I saw it with a friend of mine the other day, and we were talking afterwards. And I do feel like the threat overall it's a pretty brand new threat than like their typical, you know, some rogue agent's got a nuclear bomb, biological device, rabbit's foot, whatever the hell that ended up being. Like this was very different and a lot more relevant because it was using like AI as like the big threat. And like that just felt, you know, very topical because that's a huge topic of conversation these days, like AI and how it's going to change the world and how it can be used for good and bad. And so I did like that. I thought that was cool. I thought that was, you know, that they kind of did decide to change it up just a little bit.
Yeah. So yeah, all of that to say is that for whatever reason, even though it doesn't, I can't put a finger on what makes it so different. Maybe it's not, but it feels fresh, which is good when you're coming into the 7th film in a franchise that is going to go, at least can have 8 movies. So, it's good that it feels fresh. I don't think there's a lot of other movie franchises that can do that. Maybe Fast and the Furious, at 7, but now we're at a point with Fast and the Furious movies where it's like, okay, it's getting stale. So I hope that they can figure out ways to continue to do that, because this was a really great experience. Like, it's not my favorite Mission Impossible movie.
No, I still. Yeah. Or go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
I was just gonna say, I think I said it the other day. Like, I still think Fallout is my favorite sequel of the sequels.
Yeah, same.
I still think it's the better one, but this one was still a great time. It was well paced, very thrilling. Yeah.
Agreed. So yeah, I think that it's probably number 3 in my list of Mission Impossible movies out of 7. Maybe 4. I could make that argument too. Yeah. So cool. So there's 2 big things. So that means, Tom, you get the honor of presenting the last big thing, the third big thing. Excellent. Of 3 big things.
So my last big thing is just the stunts. Like, if there's one thing you can count on Tom Cruise for, it's the quality of stunt work he's going to put into his movies. And you can tell he works really hard. And like, for the last several months, there's that big stunt where he's on the dirt bike and he just launches himself off this cliff face. And it's not spoiling anything, because like, it's been on social media for months now, and like, just a lot of behind the scenes on how they filmed it and executed it. And it's just so impressive. And then when you finally see it in the movie, you're just like, holy crap. Like, this guy, like, he's really doing those things. And it's just insane. Like, the lengths that he is willing to go to like make something really entertaining for the audience. And I've just always appreciated that about him. I know that he's probably a problematic figure at times, but I do think though that like, he is great at what he does, and I will always go see, what he makes.
Yeah, he's weird. I don't like saying problematic for Tom Cruise, because I feel like he's maybe not, but like, he's definitely weird, and like, personality wise, like, not somebody that you feel like you can be, you're getting the real genuine human being.
That's fair. But, problematic may not have been the right word, but
no, you can make the argument. I do think though that you're right, as far as when he makes a movie. I feel like with this one, and then also with Top Gun last year, he knows what he's doing as a producer. Like, as an actor, he's fine. I mean, he obviously, these are his roles. Like, you're not going to cast somebody else as Ethan Hunt. You're not going to cast somebody else as Maverick. But he knows what he's doing as a producer, and he knows like, hey, yes, it's cool that we have all these stunts and these action, pieces, these set pieces, stuff like that. But I feel like he really understands it's like, all of that's nothing if it doesn't service the story.
Yeah.
So with this movie, I thought the story was intriguing. It kept me interested. It's kind of a longer movie, but I wasn't ever at any point like, really confused or like just kind of wishing it to be pushed along so we can get to the end of it. So it's a good, engaging story. And like I said, I think he recognizes the importance of like, if I'm going to be jumping off of a cliff from a motorcycle and parachuting down onto a train, it needs to make sense. And in this movie, it totally makes sense.
Yeah. It wasn't just a stunt for a stunt's sake.
Right.
It like fit with what was happening.
Right. It wasn't that kind of like idea of like, hey, Fast and Furious, let's put a car in space. And it's like, why? It's like, no, I'm going to ride my motorcycle off of a cliff and I'm going to parachute down onto a train. And it makes sense in the story. It has to go this way. So, I agree with you. I feel like I think he still got it.
Yeah.
If you're asking me, the guy still got it. The stunts are great. And it makes for a very exciting time. Some real butthole clenching moments, as I like to say.
Yes, very much so.
Which, I'm getting older. I'm getting more cynical. My butthole is looser. It's just harder to, really get me it's really hard to get me in those moments where I find myself really like on the edge of my seat. But there's a few scenes in this movie where I was legitimately on the edge of my seat and like,
because they don't rely on a lot of CGI. Like I think there's some, but for the most part, it's like him like driving the car down these narrow streets, hanging on the edge of planes, jumping off cliffs on a motorcycle. Yeah, and it's great.
Yeah. And also, like, just side note, I don't know what it is. I never really used to care about car chases. No, I love them. I'm all about.
Well, when they're not like the obnoxious Fast and Furious ones, when they're like a done, real, like using real cars and like real people, and just like even like a level of choreography that a lot of other chase scenes don't have. Like it's kind of masterful.
Yeah, I agree. And also, like, like you said, if you don't use CGI and you make it real, I also think there's something to be said. They did this in Fallout, and they also did it in this movie where they start the car chase with music. Like, there's actually like a score behind it. And then they just cut the score, and it's just the sound of the car chase, which I think is always really cool. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I just love that transition and then just the raw sound of like an actual car chase. So, yeah, and also apologies to Fast and Furious. I feel like we're really shitting on them for no reason today.
Yeah. No, it's just I think I'm just kind of a little Fast and Furious weary at this point.
Yeah, same. Agreed.
So I think I just have some opinions right now that I don't mean to be disparaging of it. I know it's got its purpose, and I have enjoyed most of them, but
they're fine. They're entertaining, but I agree. They're just kind of outplayed and overdone and, obnoxiously absurd at points. So, well, cool. Well, that's 3 big things on Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. And that's going to bring us to the end of this little podcast that we got going on. So that being said, Tom, you got anything else you would want to say? Actually, let me back that up. If I were to ask you, would you recommend this movie? What would your answer be?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
I would.
Cool. Same here. 100% recommend this movie. But yeah, that's going to bring us to the end of our time. So of course, I'm Kenny. This is Tom, and this is we're part of the CineBoys podcast. Which just quick plugs on that. You can follow us on social media at Twitter and Instagram at the CineBoys, and then you can also follow us. Of course, we are a podcast, so anywhere you get your podcast, be sure to rate, review, subscribe. You can also find us at youtube.com/corkbats. We also post our podcast videos up there. And then also be sure to check out corkbats.com, where you can read all of our movie reviews and other fun little bits that we do for Cork Bats. We will have the actual review of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning up. It actually should be up now if you're listening to this. So go ahead and check that out. But other than that, that's it for this week. And we really appreciate your time with us. And Tom, it was good to see you.
You as well.
All right. Bye now.
Bye.